Hey guys, tonight we slip back into the soot-stained streets of medieval Paris. The air is thick with the smell of yeast, smoke and just a hint of wet rat. You're tucked in your woolen cloak, breathing softly as the city sleeps, but not all is quiet. Somewhere nearby you hear it, the low clatter of wooden wheels, the creak of an oven's iron door, and the faint whisper of a fire being coaxed back to life. You're following it now, the scent of bread just starting to rise, warm, doughy, with a crust so crisp it could probably double as armor. You're not dreaming this. You're walking into the world of medieval bakers. Just don't trip over the chamber pot someone tossed out the window. Now you probably won't survive this. Not because of a sword fight or plague, though those are definite options, but because you might forget to bribe the breadweighers or worse, bake something too light. Bread wasn't just breakfast, it was regulation, reputation, and religion rolled into one round loaf. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past narrow, cobbled lanes, ducking under low-hung laundry stiff with frost. The baker's quarter smells like ash and salt, and every few doors there's a family-run boulangerie with shutters cracked open just wide enough to let out the scent of freshly baked pain de campagne. But tonight something's off. There's a commotion near the bakery owned by the well-known Fournier family. Not a good sign, especially before sunrise. Medieval French bakers didn't just wake early. They woke obscenely early. You've barely blinked out the sleep crust from your eyes, and they've already kneaded, shaped, and stoked their ovens, which are dangerously temperamental brick beasts fueled by wood, straw, or even manure if times were tight. You think modern jobs are hard? Try sweating over 800-degree embers with the church demanding your best loaves for free. Bakers were often forced to live on the edge of both the city and legality. The Fournier boy tells you someone's been stealing loaves, again. Not one or two, but baskets of bread gone missing in the silent hour just before the rooster crows. The math doesn't add up. If each baker loses 5 loaves a night, that's a week's wages out the window, or into someone else's stomach. Bread back then wasn't just food. It was life insurance. For most Parisians in the 13th century, bread made up over 70% of daily calorie intake. People weren't casually cutting carbs. They were counting crumbs. So when bread disappears, it's more than a minor inconvenience, it's grounds for a full-scale neighborhood scandal. You crouch by the Fournier ovens, watching as their matriarch kneads dough with a rhythmic slap, flour flying into the firelit haze. Her jaw's tight. She knows what's coming. In a few hours, the night watchmen will do their rounds, and if they find the bakery short on required output, trouble. She mutters something under her breath about rival bakers from the Rue de Lombards. Petty turf wars were as common as butterless toast. And yes, butter was extra. Suddenly there's shouting from the alley. You rush out and see a scrawny kid, barefoot, smudged with soot, caught red-handed with a hot loaf under his tunic. A classic street thief. But here's the twist. When the boy swears he found the bread already sitting outside the Fournier shop, just abandoned on a barrel, the whisper spreads. Could it be an inside job? This wasn't unheard of. There were stories, half rumor, half truth, about apprentices secretly selling loaves off the books, pocketing a little silver and blaming phantoms. Sometimes they claimed a fox stole them, or that a saint appeared in the night demanding tithes. One baker once blamed God's hunger, and still managed to escape a fine with that excuse. Go figure. Historians still argue whether these tales of theft were actual criminal enterprises or convenient scapegoats for economic instability and failed yeast. Grain prices fluctuated wildly. In bad harvest years, a sack of flour could cost twice what it did the previous season. If your dough didn't rise, neither did your income. You follow the Fournier matriarch to the back room, where they've started keeping a secret inventory scroll, literally counting loaves with charcoal ticks on the wall. It's rudimentary but oddly comforting. You wonder if medieval Excel spreadsheets looked like this. Monday, 38 loaves. Tuesday, 36. Wednesday, who took my bread? As the fire crackles and someone yawns in the corner, you start to drift into the rhythm of the bakery. The slap of dough. The clink of copper. The occasional snore from a flour-sprinkled dog curled up by the hearth. But just when it seems like things are settling, there's a knock at the door. It's one of the city matures de pain, bread measurers. You hold your breath. These guys don't come with good news. They carry iron scales and more judgment than a Sunday confessional. They step in, eye the racks of steaming bowls and pull out their weights. The scene feels oddly familiar. like TSA but for carbs. You watch as they weigh a loaf, their faces unreadable. Too light and the bakery could be fined, shamed, or worse, accused of fraud. You lean in, heart pounding. The scale settles. Just enough. The Fournier matriarch exhales so loudly she fogs up the inspector's scroll. A small, silent victory. But there's no celebration yet. There's still the mystery of the missing bread. And tomorrow night, it might be someone else's bakery, someone else's accusation, someone else's scrawny thief. You step outside into the cold morning light, your cloak heavier with smoke and secrets. Paris is waking. The bells toll softly in the distance. Bread is everywhere, and yet, for those who bake it, it's somehow never enough. You glance back one last time at the Fournier shop as a crow lands near the doorway and pecks at a burnt crust. The game, as they say, is afoot. You don't notice him at first. He blends in with the mist the same way smoke blends with a hungry oven, quietly until it chokes you. He's wrapped in a dull gray cloak, boots caked in flour dust, fingers stained from ink and dough. You pass him without a second glance, but he's already clocked you, already scribbling something into a slim leather-bound ledger. This man? He's not a baker. He's not a thief. He's something worse. He's a bread inspector. Yes, you're being watched now. Every loaf you bake, every ounce of flour you use, every crust you sell, it all falls under the jurisdiction of these unsmiling food detectives. The maîtres de pain, the weight measurers, or as the locals call them behind closed doors, les coupe pains, the bread cutters. Officially appointed by the city and backed by both the church and crown, their job is to make sure the bread you buy isn't some flaky lie. Literally. You duck into a narrow stone bakery, different street, same routine. The head baker nods you inside with floury hands. This one's less chaotic than the Fourniers. More organized, almost suspiciously so. Rows of bread already sit on the shelf, perfectly rounded, uniform as choir boys. Too uniform. You raise an eyebrow. And right on cue, our friend in gray enters. The inspector doesn't bother knocking. He sweeps inside with the quiet menace of a man who knows his way around a confiscated baguette. From under his cloak, he reveals a small set of cast-iron weights and an oddly pristine scale that hasn't touched a single crumb of joy in its entire existence. He chooses a loaf at random. You hold your breath again. He slices it down the middle, not with a knife but with a blade more ceremonial than practical. Like some bread version of Excalibur. He peers at the crumb structure, the air pockets, the density. His nose twitches. He smells for souring, for shortcut fermentation, for deceit. Then he weighs it. The baker shifts on his heels. A bead of sweat forms on his temple. You're just about to mouth, "It's fine," when the inspector tuts. Too light by a few ounces. Disaster. You expect a fine, maybe a warning, but no. This inspector reaches into his satchel and pulls out a wooden sign. Fraudeur du pain, bread fraudster. Without a word, he slaps it on the bakery's door. And just like that, the man's business is tainted. You blink. Is that it? But no, this is just step one. Because now comes the punishment parade. Yes, in medieval France, it wasn't enough to be caught short-changing bread. You had to perform your shame. Publicly. Humiliatingly. There were known cases, historians still debate which city started it, where bakers were marched through town with underweight loaves strung around their necks like flavorless jewelry. One particularly unlucky fellow was forced to wear his apron as a blindfold while leading a donkey cart of stale bread through the square. The crowd threw cabbage. It's not quite TikTok cancel culture, but it hit similar notes. Now, you might think these punishments were harsh. But remember, in a society where bread was sometimes all people had, skimping on a loaf was like skimming off someone's rent, meal, and medicine all in one. The church, naturally, had its flour-covered fingers in this too. You pass a parish near the market square where a young priest is lecturing on the sin of bread deceit. He uses terms like weighing against salvation and burning in the ovens of purgatory, which feels a little heavy-handed for someone who maybe just forgot to level off the flour scoop. Still, fear is powerful. And bakers knew it. To avoid the wrath of the inspectors, many kept what's called a pain de courtoisie, a courtesy loaf. A little larger than required, meant to compensate for shrinkage during baking. Think of it as medieval over-delivery. If the law asked for 2 pounds, you gave 2.1, just in case. That 0.1 might save your reputation, your family, and your front door from being branded with shame signs. You're leaning against a wooden beam, watching the inspector move to the next bakery when a local woman nudges you with her elbow. She whispers that some inspectors, especially the seasoned ones, could be bribed. A coin here, a free loaf there, and they might just forget to measure the bread properly. It's a game, really. A crusty dance of power and pastry. But don't get too smug. There's a growing movement to clean up the system. The royal courts, alarmed by complaints from both bakers and customers, start appointing rotating inspectors, less prone to bribes, more prone to self-importance. Some even start traveling with guards, as attacks on bread inspectors aren't uncommon. You heard right. One inspector in Rouen was reportedly chased into a river by a mob of bakers who'd had enough. No word on whether he floated. Meanwhile, back on your current street, an old baker named Henri leans against his oven and shares a story. He says that once, during a freak shortage of rye, every bakery in the district secretly cut their flour with ground chestnuts. The bread came out paler, denser, a little sweet, but just enough like the real thing to pass inspection. No one got caught. But ever since, Henri swears he can taste lies in the crust. You believe him. There are fringe stories too. One tale, likely apocryphal, claims that a baker in Bordeaux trained rats to steal bread from rival shops and bring it back to his oven. This, by the way, is either brilliant or horrifying, and probably both. Historians still argue whether it's just an exaggerated fable or a crumb of truth in a loaf of legend. What is real, though, is the mounting pressure on bakers. You see it in the circles under their eyes, the tremble in their hands when an inspector reaches for a scale. These people aren't just feeding customers, they're feeding the entire structure of faith, law, and basic survival. And every loaf is both a meal and a test. You step outside just as a bell tolls. No. Inspectors pack up their tools, their scrolls, their judgments. But the bakers? They go right back to kneading. Because dawn will come again, and with it, another inspection, another gamble, another weigh-in. You wonder if your dreams tonight will smell like scorched crust. You're not just making bread anymore. Now you're making enemies. See, the ovens may burn hot, but the politics in a medieval French bakery? Much hotter. You thought surviving inspectors was hard. Now try surviving the guild. Try surviving the whisper campaigns, the rivalries, the unspoken rules that turn flour and water into a full-blown social battlefield. And at the center of it all? A missing loaf. One. Single. Loaf. But first, let's talk guilds. You're sitting in a candlelit hall now, the air thick with the scent of yeast, sweat, and stale authority. The Bakers' Guild of Paris, in all its crusty glory, is holding a meeting. Long tables. Aging men with flowered beards. Scrolls unrolled dramatically. And a strange, almost church-like reverence for the bread placed ceremoniously at the head of the room. Guilds weren't just clubs, they were gatekeepers. They regulated who could bake, where they could bake, how many apprentices they could train, even how early they could fire up their ovens. Without guild approval, your bakery wasn't just unauthorized, it was illegal. The kind of illegal that got your door boarded up and your reputation smothered in rumors before you could even say baguette. But guilds weren't just about rules. They were about control. And nothing disrupted that control more than a loaf gone missing. You shift nervously in your chair as the guild master raises a finger, crooked from years of kneading. He calls for silence. And then, in the same tone a priest might use to read a confession, he announces that a complaint has been lodged. Someone's bread has vanished. Cue the collective inhale. Someone in this very room, someone with flour on their tunic and pride in their dough, is being accused of theft. And not just any theft, bread theft. In a world where grain is wealth and bread is life, stealing a loaf isn't petty. It's betrayal. It's treason by crust. The accused is summoned forward. A young man named Pierre. Early 20s, barely a journeyman. You saw him once hauling sacks of rye behind the Fournier shop. He trembles as he approaches the head table. He says it wasn't him. He swears. He even gestures to his calloused hands, as if their soreness alone should prove his innocence. Doesn't matter. Because here's the thing, guild rules didn't require hard proof. They required consensus. If enough senior bakers agreed something smelled off, figuratively or literally, that was often enough. Pierre tries to defend himself, but the guild master silences him with a lazy wave. There's a short deliberation. Someone mentions a rumor about a second oven Pierre may have been using. Another claims they saw him at the market selling a loaf with an unfamiliar seal. Nothing confirmed. Everything suspicious. And that's all it takes. Guild punishment rarely meant prison. They had something worse, banishment. It's quiet when they announce it. Almost polite. But the consequences? Devastating. Pierre is stripped of his right to bake. Not just in that shop, but anywhere in the city. His tools. Forfeited. Apprenticeship? Voided. It's as if he never needed a dough in his life. A guild clerk walks over and stamps a red wax mark on his ledger, a symbol that tells other bakeries to turn him away. No one speaks. No one helps him pack. He disappears into the city fog like a phantom of flour, his future dissolving crumb by crumb. You shiver. You think this is rare? It's not. The guild archives, yes, those exist, are dotted with these cases. Sometimes it's bread gone missing. Other times it's accusations of using banned additives, crushed beans, ground up straw, even sawdust. Some were probably guilty. Others? Maybe they just crossed the wrong baker in the wrong district. Historians still argue whether these exiles were always justified or whether they were sometimes politically motivated takedowns. Especially in times of famine, when guilds tightened control like a baker cinching a proving cloth. One missing loaf could just as easily be a warning shot to others. You slip outside needing air. The streets hum with suspicion. Two older bakers mutter behind you about a case in Tours, where a loaf was found buried in straw behind a rival bakery's wall. The accused had no idea how it got there. Or so he claimed. But the real twist? It wasn't even his bread. It had the mark of a third shop, one that had mysteriously gone out of business the week before. Was it a setup? A theft ring? An unsolved carbohydrate mystery? You'll never know. And that's the point. Guild politics were rarely about truth. They were about survival. Neighborhood loyalties ran deep. If your bakery was on Rue du Temple and the guy across the street was from Rue de Lombards, your flour might as well have come from different planets. If he undercut your prices, you complained to the guild. If he trained too many apprentices, you whispered to the inspector. If one of his loaves accidentally went missing, well, that's how banishments happen. You wander into a quiet alley near a bakery known for its honey-sweetened loaves, technically against guild policy, but no one's snitched yet. Outside, a group of apprentices sit with their backs to the wall, whispering about how a friend of theirs got kicked out of town for baking during Lent. Baking during Lent. Bread had rules even God might have had trouble following. One of them mentions a secret society of rogue bakers in the countryside, outlaws who refused to join guilds and operated ovens in old barns. Fringe stuff. Most people laugh at it, but a few believe. You tuck the rumor away just in case you ever need to disappear. That night, back in your rented room above a wine cellar, you find yourself checking the door lock twice. Not because you fear burglars, but because you fear reputation. Because one vanished roll, one misplaced rye boule, and your life could turn to ash faster than a scorched baguette. The bread doesn't just feed the people here. It feeds suspicion. It feeds power. It feeds a whole ecosystem of rules you never agreed to, but must obey. So next time you hear someone joke about bread drama, maybe remind them, in medieval France, bread drama could exile you. You wake up to frost on the window and an ache in your belly. It's winter now, real winter. The kind where the Seine runs sluggish with ice, the wells take forever to thaw, and every breath fogs up like a chimney whispering secrets. You tug your threadbare cloak tighter, step outside and smell nothing. No bread. No warmth. Just smoke, desperation, and the sharp silence of empty ovens. This isn't a quirky bread story anymore. This is survival. And you're smack in the middle of it. The grain shipments haven't come for weeks. The docks are frozen, the roads too dangerous, and the prices? So high even the rich are chewing barley like peasants. You watch as a nobleman passes on horseback, chewing something that definitely isn't brioche. There's no bread today. Maybe not tomorrow either. And people are starving. You duck into your local bakery, well, what's left of it? The shelves are bare, save for a few burnt ends and yesterday's crusts. The baker behind the counter gives you a look. Not cruel, not unfriendly, just empty. She has nothing left to sell. She baked what little flour she had last night. Most of it was eaten before sunrise. You glance down and notice she's not alone. Her child sits beside her, nibbling on a single heel of rye like it's gold. You don't need a history book to explain what this means. You feel it in your bones. Bread isn't just food, it's currency, it's protection, it's life. And when bread goes missing in times like these, people don't just get angry. They riot. It starts with whispers. That a baker is hoarding flour. That his wife was seen carrying sacks through the alley after dark. That their chimney's been active too long. That someone's baking at night in secret while everyone else starves by day. You know how fast gossip moves in a desperate city? Like wildfire on parchment. The accusations land hard, fast, and bloody. There's a crowd now. Forming outside the Fournier bakery again. Why is it always the Fourniers? You edge close enough to hear the shouting. It's not directed at the baker but his wife. Elise. A woman with thick braids and calloused fingers. Her only crime? Being seen. Being too visible. Maybe being too well fed. Someone swears they saw her carrying a basket lined in cloth. Another claims the cloth had crumbs on it. That's That's all it takes. The door splinters. She doesn't even have time to run. They don't hurt her, yet, but they pull her into the street. Demand answers. Where's the flour? Who's she feeding? Is she trading with merchants behind closed doors? The mob's not organized, but it doesn't need to be. Hunger turns people into pack animals. It takes a nearby priest's intervention to get her out alive. He throws open the chapel doors and lets her inside. But even as she's rushed into safety, you hear someone mutter, "She's guilty. Look at her skin, too pink." That's not a starving woman. Historians still argue whether these bread riots were truly about hoarding, or whether they reflected deeper fears, gendered blame, political mistrust, economic collapse. All we know for sure is this: you didn't want to be a baker's wife in a famine. One wrong step, one rumor, and your life could be traded for a burnt crust. You walk back through the city with your head low. In some places the bakeries have posted signs, "No bread, no flour, no hope." Others have been barricaded, ovens cold, chimneys bricked shut by neighbors who feared the flames meant secret baking. It's not just about hunger, it's about fairness. People can endure famine if they believe everyone is starving together. But the second someone's seen with an extra roll, even by mistake, the illusion breaks. The city turns on itself. You pass a woman kneeling at the steps of the bakery guild hall. She's crying, holding out a pair of shoes in exchange for a loaf. No one accepts. Her shoes are too small, too worn. You keep walking, but her sobs follow you down the alley. Later that night, as you lie in bed under 3 layers of patchy blankets, you think about that stolen bun you almost grabbed off a cart earlier. Just one. Left unattended, its crust glinting in the moonlight like treasure. You didn't take it, but someone else did. By morning there's news. Another bakery was broken into. Not robbed, just emptied. Every loaf gone. Oven scraped clean. No signs of forced entry. The baker says he suspects a neighbor, someone who knew the layout. But no one's talking. No one ever does. You join the crowd gathered to stare at the wreckage. A woman in the back mutters, "Good? He's been overcharging for years." Another says, "Serves him right for baking during Lent." Again with Lent. Seems even religion can't bake you a break here. It's worth remembering that the medieval concept of hunger wasn't just biological, it was moral. Starving made you desperate, yes, but it also made you judged. If you begged, you were seen as weak. If you stole, you were sinful. If you had bread when others didn't, you were a suspect. And so, the Fournier Bakery closes for the season. Not officially, no one nails up a sign. But their door stays shut, the chimney unlit, the window dark. Elise is never seen again. Some say she fled to the countryside. Others whisper about the convent. A few claim she was smuggled into the rogue baker network, living somewhere outside the guild's iron grip. You don't know the truth. You only know that by next week, someone else is baking in that shop. A man with a different name and the same tired eyes. The winter continues. The famine slowly lifts. Grain starts trickling back into the markets. A few loaves reappear behind windows, guarded like treasure. But something in you has changed. Bread doesn't feel like comfort anymore. Feels like risk. Like judgment. Like a secret too fragile to trust in the open. You pull your cloak tighter and walk on. And somewhere in the alley behind you, another bun disappears. You step through a heavy wooden door into dim torchlight. It smells like flour, sweat, and something far less romantic. Mildew, maybe? Welcome to the prison. No, not the grim, dungeon-y ones you imagine with rats and iron chains. This one's smaller. Stranger. More crusty. Yes, you've just wandered into a baker prison. Now that phrase probably makes you blink. What now? But here you are, underground in medieval Paris, standing in what was once part of the Grand Châtelet complex, or in another account, hidden behind the doors of the Bakers' Guild Hall itself. And it's not just a symbolic thing. These were real, documented punishments, tiny jails meant specifically for bakers who broke the rules. You can practically hear the iron hinges groaning behind you. Bakers, as you've probably gathered by now, weren't just crusty craftsmen. They were watched, regulated, policed. And when they failed to meet the bread quotas, messed with the scales, or, heaven forbid, sold underweight loaves, they could be publicly shamed or dragged right here. You run your fingers along the stone wall. There's a groove carved into it, possibly made by a nervous baker pacing in circles. Or maybe it's where he tried to scratch tally marks to count the days. Except, rumor says they never stayed here that long. See, that's where things get weird. Historians still argue whether these bread jails were proper punitive spaces, legally codified and monitored, or more performative, almost theatrical. Some believe these cells were more about spectacle than isolation. Imagine this. A baker caught skimping on dough is imprisoned for 3 days, but the cell's located right next to the market, where townsfolk can walk by and toss insults. Or stale crust. Or worse. You step closer to the barred window, a square cutout that faces the street. From here, passers-by could see the condemned baker clearly. Some guild records suggest that townspeople were even encouraged to jeer, throw spoiled food, or yell insults like "crumb thief" or "flour liar." It wasn't about hurting the baker. It was about protecting the idea of bread. It had to stay sacred. And if someone violated that trust, even by a few ounces, the punishment had to be memorable and humiliating. You notice something else odd, etched faintly into the wood beside the cot. A recipe. No joke. A basic rye formula. Maybe it was the prisoner's attempt at irony. Or maybe he was just thinking about what he'd do when he got out. You sit for a moment on the edge of the stone bench. The space is tight. If you stretched out, your feet would hit the wall. There's no chamber pot. No food. Probably not even a pillow. But what makes it so eerie is the silence. The thought that the punishment wasn't loneliness, it was being seen, judged, and remembered. And it wasn't just the baker himself who bore the shame. If a bakery got caught breaking the laws more than once, say the scales were rigged or the bread was too light again, the guild could suspend the entire family from practicing. That meant everyone in the household. And while the husband was in the bread jail, guess who got blamed out in the streets? That's right. His wife. His sons. Even the apprentice boy sweeping the flour. One man's crushed crime could ripple through his whole family. And here's where things really curdle. There's an old report about a baker in Toulouse who, after 3 offenses, wasn't just jailed, he was forced to wear a collar of stale bread and parade through the town square. People threw flour at him as he walked. Not gold. Flour. The very thing he was accused of cheating with. It was symbolic humiliation at its finest, or worst. Now, was this standard? Hard to say. Some of these stories may have been exaggerated over time, layered with myth and civic drama. Others seem plausible, backed by court scrolls and guild complaints. Still, you have to ask yourself, was the jail really about bread? Or control? In a city like medieval Paris, dense, hungry, tense, bread wasn't just nourishment. It was social glue. When bread broke down, so did order. So maybe the baker prison wasn't just for the rule breakers. Maybe it was a message to everyone else. Don't mess with the crust. You hear footsteps above, the sound of a daily market opening. The prices have gone up again. Word is, a shipment from Burgundy never arrived, and rumors swirl about spoiled grain being sold in secret. Once again, suspicion turns toward the bakers. Because whenever things go wrong, it's easier to blame the face behind the oven than the faceless tax collector, or the rotting grain sacks, or the droughts that ruined the harvest to begin with. And yet, some of the most extreme punishments didn't happen quietly. You stand now at the memory of a baker named Jean Leclerc. He was sentenced to bread jail in the 1300s for mixing chalk into his flour, a fraud that risked poisoning customers. After 3 days in the cell, he was brought before the guild leaders, who made him kneel in the square and publicly confess. Then, they burned his fake bread in front of the crowd like heresy. Literal pyrotechnics. And what happened to Jean? He disappeared from the records. Maybe he fled. Maybe he was banned from baking ever again. Or maybe, just maybe, he became one of those shadowy rogue bakers you've heard about. Operating without guild permission, baking by moonlight, selling buns from the back doors of taverns and bathhouses. It's the kind of life you don't brag about, but in desperate times, it was survival. You take one last look around the jail cell. It's not big. It's not dramatic. But something about it chills you more than a dungeon ever could. Because this wasn't punishment for theft or violence. It was punishment for betraying trust. You push open the heavy door again and step into the light. And as you walk away, you notice something odd in the alley. A fresh loaf, sitting alone on the steps of a shuttered bakery. No note. No bag. No explanation. And you don't touch it. Because now you know, nothing in this city is just bread. You stand stiff in a vaulted stone room, your palms sweaty, not from heat but from nerves. The court clerk's quill scratches like a beetle across parchment. A low buzz of murmurs echoes from the gallery benches behind you. Someone sneezes. A cough. A bread cart rattles past outside. You're not at a royal trial or facing charges of treason. You're here because of a missing loaf. That's right. And in medieval France, that's enough to summon witnesses, roll out the rulebooks, and even, if things get wild, dip your trembling fingers into a pot of boiling water to prove your innocence. We'll get there. First, you glance nervously at the guild magistrate. He's got a dusting of flour on his cuffs, which somehow makes him even scarier. He represents the Bakers Guild, a powerful internal watchdog agency with real judicial muscle. You're not just answering to the city. You're answering to the crust cartel. Your charge? Selling short-weight bread and possibly hiding a second batch of loaves for private profit. Bread fraud. A crusty crime with very chewy consequences. It's not just about bread. It's about trust, fairness, and moral order in a world where food meant survival. And now they want the truth. You're asked to swear an oath, on bread naturally. A special ceremonial loaf is brought out. Not for eating. Just for swearing. You place your hand on it, trying not to shake. Somewhere behind you, someone mutters, "May the dough rise against him." Thanks. The court calls witnesses. A neighbor insists she saw you baking extra late on Monday. Another says she bought a loaf that felt unnaturally light. Someone else, probably that jealous bread apprentice from next door, claims you were spotted handing a secret sack of baguettes to a tavern boy at dawn. You protest, of course. You plead that you followed every rule, every weight, every crust test. But medieval courts weren't always big on logic. They preferred drama. That's when the trial escalates. They wheel out a large black cauldron. Fill it with water. Start a fire underneath. Yes. Welcome to ordeal by boiling water, medieval France's idea of a lie detector test. Because if you're innocent, God will protect your hand from burns. And if you're guilty? Well, they lower the iron pot to your level. The baker judge gestures to the bottom. A tiny stone sits at the base of the steaming pot. You're told to reach in, pull it out, and then your hand will be wrapped and bandaged for 3 days. After that, the wound will be examined. If it's clean and healing well, innocence. If it's blistered and angry-looking, guilt. Simple, right? And no, this wasn't just for murderers or heretics. This was actually used for commercial fraud, especially when grain prices were high and tempers were short. Remember, food wasn't just nourishment. It was justice. You hesitate. Your fingers hover over the pot. Your nose fills with the metallic scent of boiling iron and damp smoke. Then just as you're about to dip your hand in, a loud voice interrupts. "We'll try another method." Your heart thuds. You've been spared the cauldron. Sort of. Now they hand you a chunk of dry, unsalted bread. This one's worse. Welcome to the ordeal of the dry morsel, another beloved method of truth-seeking. You're told to chew and swallow it while reciting an oath. If you choke, cough, or can't swallow, you're guilty. What? Because guilt supposedly makes the throat tighten, the mouth dry. Lying, they believed, literally stuck in your throat. Historians still argue whether this was meant as a psychological trap or just plain torture. You hold the crumbly lump in your mouth. It's awful. It scratches like gravel. Your mouth is already dry from nerves. But you chew. Slowly. Carefully. All eyes are on you. You swallow. The silence is unbearable. And then, nothing. No choking. No gagging. You've passed. Or at least you haven't failed. The judge squints. He writes something in a giant leather-bound book. You can almost hear the word probation forming in his head. The court isn't done though. Now come the fines. You're ordered to pay a fee to the guild, possibly as a restoration of honor, or just a clever way to refill their flour stocks. You're also banned from selling bread for 2 weeks. And you must donate 10 loaves to the nearest leper house. This part feels a little better. Because beneath the public shame, the weird trials, and the paranoia, there was often an undercurrent of communal responsibility. Bakers weren't just punished. They were reintegrated, forced to give back, to feed the poor, to earn trust again. It's not redemption exactly, but it's not just cruelty either. Still, as you leave the courtroom, your reputation bruised and your apron heavier with guilt than flour, you know something's changed. You'll be watched more closely now, inspected more frequently, and worst of all, you've earned a nickname, Crumb Finger. You hate it already. A group of boys snicker as you pass the bakery next door. One throws a lump of dough at your sign. You wipe it off and sigh. Because here's the thing. Medieval justice wasn't about proving absolute truth. It was about public belief, social memory. And even if you were technically innocent, the whispers could still follow you. And if it happens again, there may not be a trial next time. You've heard stories of bakers taken outside the city walls, their ovens smashed, their livelihoods burned. A kind of bread excommunication. Maybe it's myth, maybe it's real. But the fear keeps you in line. You step back into your quiet, flour-dusted shop. Everything feels louder now. The creak of the dough bowl, the crack of a crust, the clink of the weight scale. You kneel by the hearth, stir the embers, and start again. Because as brutal as it all was, the trials, the shame, the boiling water, This was still your life, your calling. To feed the city, to bake with honor, and above all else to keep your fingers out of other people's flour sacks. And now, as the courtroom fades and the firelight of your humble bakery softens into a flickering hush, you step outside into the cool night air of medieval Paris. The cobblestones are slick with dew. Somewhere a cat knocks over a crate. Far off, a bell tolls, soft and distant, marking the hour when even the bakers finally sleep. You walk slowly, your apron loosened, the streets emptying as if the city itself exhales. The tension of trials, punishments, and hard-won trust dissolves into quiet shadows. Behind closed shutters, families drift to sleep with full bellies, never knowing how close their supper came to vanishing, or how you nearly lost everything to one lost loaf. But for now, no one's knocking at your door. No one's weighing your crust. There is only stillness, warm bread cooling on the rack, and the sound of your own breath slowing, matching the rhythm of a city settling into dreams. Let the ovens rest. Let your mind loosen, like dough rising in gentle silence. You're safe now. You made it through. Sleep well, Crumbfinger.